Definitely a lot of the dialogue uh, is definitely probably written with some of that tongue in cheek of like, yeah, we're dealing with a quarantine. But one thing that also made it interesting is that Horspex was in at least in Horsepex's route, it was Denkovsky that enacted the quarantine. Um, and it's not like you could have left beforehand because the trains were also messed up. And now they just deliberately wouldn't let people out of the town. And also how people had, and also depending on how people were stationed in their houses, how different districts were shut off because of how it spread. Being close to people who like had it, like they were all wrapped up, but even if they were wrapped up, it still could spread through touch. Being around infected people was just incredibly dangerous because it was an airborne disease. Um, like like when I first started hearing about stuff that was going on in 2020, I tried to get a medical mask. Like, if anything, that's probably one of the biggest influences that this game did to me is that, like, no, I took protection very seriously because can't you can't act like it's not. You can't act like protection isn't important because if you get it, you don't know how your body's going to react to it. Um, like any person infected in Horsepex's route, regardless of even if they had a small chance of being infected or not, they still had a chance to die every single day. Like, yeah, you could have high immunity and like you'd be safe, and you had a chance of being safe for longer if you had a higher immunity. But even if you did have a high immunity, you still had a chance of dying. You still had a chance of things getting worse for you. You still had a chance of just everything going wrong. Some people I never even treated perfectly went by. It didn't matter how high their susceptibility was. It didn't matter how low their immunity was. Some people just got incredibly lucky and never caught it. But then other people, like people I was treating day after day after day, and like I was keeping them alive, I was keeping their immunity high. Sometimes I just got unlucky. Sometimes I got unlucky, and the people I was treating and the people I was treating incredibly well, they still just died. And I was risking my own immunity, and I was risking getting caught with it, no matter how much protection I had, how many immunities that like I made to make sure that I would be safe. Like going into those districts, um, how much all the different filters could wear down. So much of it, there was no guarantee that I wouldn't get it. So I took every precaution that I could. Like when that's why I started wearing a lot more like heavy clothing. That's why I started like wearing some gloves. I took washing my hands very seriously. I started wearing gloves a lot more than I used to. I wore heavier jackets. I would zip up. I would wear hats. Like literally everything. I took precautions seriously. Um, and I was never really like a huge germaphobe before, but self uh, I was self conscious of it because another thing with this, especially with some of the things that happened in one, um, like again, a lot of it comes down to like sure maybe you're fine, or maybe you are infected and you don't know. And if you're just like, oh, because I'm fine, other people will be fine, right? Too? No. Other people don't have the same immune system as you. Other people don't have the same immunity as you. All because you don't have symptoms from something doesn't mean that other people can't get it. Like, every single person's body is different. And because every person's body is different, one thing that works on you or one thing that is fine for you does not mean that it'll be fine or safe for somebody else. And you have to take that into account. You have to be careful of other people because you don't know what other people are constantly dealing with. Like, that's a lot of, honestly, looking back at this point, a lot of my own medical beliefs, like, very heavily come from this. Not like entirely. Like, I got vaccinated before. I liked science. I was never really an anatomy or biology type of student. I was more into earth science at that point somehow. Um, but like, no, you can't treat every case like it's the same thing. You have to be specific. You have to be meticulous, and you have to be careful. Um, you have to be careful, not just because of yourself, but because of other people around you and people that you care about. I used to not get, I never really got sick. Like, the very few times that I got sick, um, like, because this is going to sound funny, because, like, the only one other time that there are two times that I remember being, like, really sick in recent years. And, like, yeah, I can use this as an example. In, like, the past 5 years, I got sick only like two times. One time was in, like, I want to say, like, January. The one time I got really sick was in January of 2020. It was like right before everything was going on. I distinctly remember because it really threw me off. Because like that was when I was reading stuff about this illness that was spreading uh, that originated in a district in China, and I'm like, oh, that's like I kept hearing stories about it. I'm like, oh, that's really scary, but like I feel also terrible, but it's like no, I wouldn't have got it because it like how did some disease that I'm reading about in China like get to me immediately? Um, but like I felt awful. Like I could hardly get out of bed. I felt terrible. Uh, Largely because I was so bedridden. I was basically bedridden until I had to like get up and start doing stuff. Um, and that led to me playing Grand Blue, and that ended up leading me to playing a bunch of different gotcha games because I couldn't do anything else. I could like hardly get up. I could hardly move, and it was so rough for me to even get to classes. But then eventually I started getting better, and like okay, when I was getting to classes, that's when I tried to getting different medical masks because I felt worried that because I felt bad, I might spread that to somebody else. And like before that, I was already like, okay, well, masks are kind of cool anyway. Like they're a common thing in Japan. If somebody's sick, they typically wear them so that like, they can walk around and like not infect other people, and like it's a precautionary thing. Um, and then the only other time I felt even nearly as bad as that was a couple of months ago, where I was also kind of just like essentially bedridden, where like I could hardly move. Um, right, like I could hardly get up just because like I felt awful. I still don't know what caused it, uh, but it was like the exact same conditions, where just like I could barely get up. When I did get up, I felt awful. Um, and like thankfully I had like an ice pack, but even that didn't really help all too much. I was just like bleh. And like those were the only two significant moments that I remember ever really being sick. But even then, like I still covered up. I still made sure that like no other people could get it. Get whatever I got because I never knew I still don't know what I got, but I don't want like that to potentially spread to other people. Like I always considered myself a really healthy person. So when something like that actually does impair me, I get like really like, oh, this must be serious. But to go back to what I was initially going on about, um, like yeah, a lot of the situations, a lot of the dialogue that you have with people, especially when it comes to the scarcity of food, when it came to how bad inflation especially got at like day 10, the switch over to military bonds and how that completely upends the economy and made money effectively worthless. Um, and like Pathologic 2 is such an interesting game in retrospect. And I think part of what made that game so special to me was giving me that type of experience before, literally before the year 2020 even came in. And then everything from that year on, just like I kept getting flashbacks to Pathologic 2. Um, and like I knew I still have the Bachelor's DLC in Pathologic 2 on GOG. Um, where it was like, because the original plan was to release them as a DLC. It was supposed to release the Bachelor's route and it was supposed to release the Changelings route, and I was very interested because like, oh, that the mechanics that Horospex had were very interesting, but I was wondering how like a professional doctor would work for this, because Horospex was looking for a cure-all, the just direct panacea, and Denkovsky, I don't know why I forgot for a brief moment. Denkovsky was looking for a vaccine. That was explicitly the thing that he said he was looking for during Horsepex's route, which is why he was so concerned about the hospital and the quarantines, and making sure that medical staff were doing their jobs and all this other stuff. He had a separate goal, but the endpoint was still that he wanted to cure these people, admittedly for somewhat selfish reasons, for his own fame and prosper, but it was still very in line with these people trying to help these other people during this unprecedented event. And old Kaminsky's greed and a lot of very uncooperative people ended up shaping a lot of my preconceptions when it came to essentially people just being unempathetic during the whole actual quarantine and pandemic, because it's just like people in Pathologic 2 had a stronger argument for being irrational than real people did. And I think that's the biggest thing that stuck with me. I had a harder time debating people in Pathologic 2 with the options that I had than facing the actual irrationality and absurd leaps of logic that real people made. like one, yes, it's a game thing, but it's like every person that was infected with the sand plague, their model changes. They change to be entirely wrapped in bandages and stuff. Part of that is to be like easily identifiable, and like, yeah, because they turn into active threats when they're around you, because naturally, because that's how the plague spreads. It spreads from, one, it's partly airborne, two, it spreads from person to person. So like you're walking up to somebody, and your immunity slowly goes down, and like, oh, if that just happened to anybody who looked like a normal person, you'd get really frustrated because you would treat everybody like you couldn't know if you could be within 5 feet of them or not. But every person who was infected, regardless of their importance, if they were a normal person, unspecific NPC, they were wrapped up in those bandages. If they were an important NPC, their entire model would change into being wrapped up bandages, and they would be slightly further away from you. But you would still have their name, they would still have their dialogue, and you would still have all the unique stuff with them. And in real life, that couldn't happen. In real life, that didn't happen. In real life, there would be people who knowingly would have it and not even make any attempt whatsoever even to put a mask on, because somehow caring about other people imposed on their rights. And I think that was the most frustrating part of it all. Somehow, a conversation about being conscious of other people turned into, you can't tell me what to do. And I think that very flimsy argument of, you shouldn't impose your rights upon me, really just masked a very shallow, you're telling me I should care about other people. I don't want to do that. And I think that is something that really got to me. That's something that really got to me in the past few years, because that's essentially what a lot of people in this town do. That's what a lot of people in this town did, where they were very selfish and they were still focused on their own goals and what they wanted, and they put that before literally their town falling to pieces. And at every single turn of you trying to be a good person as the horror specs, you would always run into somebody who was more focused about literally making maybe a little bit more money, about their own end goal product, about having a little bit more influence and control in the town, and that made me so infuriated. The fact that these people were unable to put their own greed aside from making sure that they could survive to the next day. I was so infuriated by how Olgaminsky made it so far in my game without me caring for him. No, I did care for him. I gave him certain immunities. I gave him different twiramine. I gave him different immunizations. Not as much as some of the other people, perhaps, but he made it. He made it through. Vlad made it through literally with minimal assistance from me. But some people who I cared for, and some people who I really actively tried day after day to make sure that they would survive, didn't. Some people just died under my care despite how much effort I gave, and then here was this fucking robber baron who locked people in this tight factory, who was so focused on his own personal gain, claiming it was for the good of the town, knowing that there was definitely people inside who probably had the sand plague and didn't care about that because he was more focused about stopping the strike and more focused about making sure that they were working and maintaining everything for his son and his legacy and maintaining his control over the town. So many people, even at this day, at day 5, are locked in that cemetery, unknown if they're being spread with the disease or not. And he didn't care. He didn't care for so long because it cut into his bottom line, and that pissed me off so much. And then I saw that exact same greedy mentality in real life, and that just... it broke me. It messed with me so much because I was seeing this fictional cartoon character being replicated again and again, and people were justifying it in real life. And I guess that's kind of why I've been really excited about this game. I've been really excited about going back to this town that irritated me and fought me at every step of the way of trying to do something nice, doing something good to help these people, even people who were Artemis' friends. Even if Stock is a dumbass, I still cared. I didn't want him to die. Like, all 3 of these healers, all 3 of these quote-unquote medical professionals, none of them want people to die. They're all doing this because they want, at least at some level, to help these people. But then these people get directly in the way of that happening. either through either through tradition, either through their own greed, or even through their own just misconception about what's going on. Like they just continuously got in the way. Even the other healers were directly getting in your way of trying to help these other people. But none of them were arguing with Dankovsky that like the vaccine was necessary. The step people felt that Artemy was underprepared to take on the reins of his father. Changeling's an entirely separate case. She gets to have her own adventure. Um, but like at some part, like there was at least a general understanding and consensus that the sand plague was bad and that it shouldn't actively spread through and wipe out the town because nobody knew who was immune to it or not. Nobody knew if anybody could be immune to it or not. It wasn't just a fend for yourself because that mentality leads to everybody dying.